Hello and welcome to SaaS Marketing Weekly with me, your host Ryan, the founder of Rocket SaaS. Today we are back in the studio with our regular guest, Jamie Skeels, the head of demand gen at Rocket SaaS. Jamie, welcome back.
We're back.
What have you been up to since we last had you on the show?
Been on holiday, which was lovely, to be honest. I was in the States, so I had a friend's wedding in California. So we went over started in LA with a big group of friends. Then we departed with the stag do to Las Vegas, which was hilarious. Went down from there to Orange County, where the bride was from. And then finished in San Diego, where she went to college, where she got married, which was great fun. It's a great wedding. And I love America. Well, I've definitely come back a few pounds heavier.
Nice. Well, I've been changing nappies and wiping vomit off my shirt. But I'm not jealous. That's San Diego, Vegas. Sounds rubbish. But today on the pod, we are talking about demand creation. So previously on the pod, episode 42, we talked about demand capture. So the overall theme is demand generation. Demand generation splits into two different areas. Demand capture, which is capturing people that are in market now, typically about 5% of your market. But demand creation is trying to capture or trying to move the other 95% of the audience from not currently looking for your product, not in market. How do we get them to be in market? So that's what this episode is all about. But I've given it a bit of an intro there. Jamie, why don't you try and describe in a bit more detail what is demand creation in the whole sphere of demand generation?
Cool. Yeah, no problem. I suppose, for kind of going back to the last episode, like you just mentioned, so the demand capture stuff, that's all about targeting the people, 5% of people who are ready to buy right now, like they're ready to pull the trigger. You just got to try and get them over the line and actually get them into a sales conversation, into a free trial, etc. Demand creation, when we're looking at demand creation, again, I'll kind of go back to the analogy and the rule of in any one given market, like at any one time, like we mentioned, it's probably about 5% of people who are in market, which means that there's 95% of people who are not ready to buy right now. They're not looking for your service. They're not looking to buy what you're selling. Most likely they have no idea who you are in most cases. So really demand creation is about how do we treat those 95% of people and what activities and strategies do we set up in order to kind of reach those people and give us the best possible chance of when they do go in market, being able to capture them. How do you set those campaigns, those activities up? And from my perspective, when we talk about demand creation, like you mentioned, like with demand capture, you can drive action because those people have a need. Like they're looking for what you're selling. And so it's much easier to kind of move them from one space to another. I think with demand creation, we can certainly like influence like behavior, the way people think, the way they think about you, how aware they are of you. But I think with demand creation, what we're ultimately trying to achieve is we're trying to set up programs to keep us front of mind with that buyer. We're trying to build affinity with that buyer. And ultimately we're trying to sort of shape their perception of us, the category, the market, and shape kind of how they associate us with problems that they need solved. And if we can do that consistently over time, when they are ready to buy something like we're selling, we're naturally going to be the first choice on their sort of consideration list, which makes it much more likely they're going to come to us when they're ready to buy.
Yeah, nice. I think understanding demand generation and what you've just described there, that 95% of people are not ready to buy, but you can and need to market to those people. That was like a seismic shift for me. I think when the penny dropped and when I understood that, I think most marketers, most founders will certainly start off their career just targeting people that are looking to buy, and they're kind of naive and hopeful that there is a ton of people that are currently looking to buy your solution. Therefore, they will just create ads and content and web pages and landing pages just speaking to those people. Like, we're a great product of, you should book a demo. Of course, you should buy it. But when you realize that there is this huge like ocean of potential buyers out there that are never going to engage with that stuff right now.
Yeah.
So if it's a more a long game, but if you create content to move people when they're ready from not being in market right now to moving over when they're ready, that is just going to absolutely make your business fly if you can get it right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting that like it's a really inconvenient kind of way to look at it sometimes, because I think when you kind of make the shift from thinking that you can kind of just drive people to a purchase, like that's sort of like, it feels proactive. Like it feels proactive that you can kind of like just sort of serve messages, like serve really persuasive marketing about how great your product is, how great your service is, etc. And you can kind of like, if it's good enough, you're going to get people to buy it. Feels proactive. But the inconvenient truth is, most of the time, in most cases, like for those people who aren't ready to buy yet, especially in B2B, like that's just not the case. Like no matter how persuasive you are, no matter how great your marketing is, like your like sort of product messaging and all that stuff, for a lot of those people, even if that makes an impact on them, they still might not buy. So I think it's both kind of liberating from one sense, where like, no, I'm not just bad. Like we're not doing the wrong things necessarily. Like we're not like talking about our product in a bad way or like pushing our product in a bad way. But it's also inconvenient is that you have to recognize it's a long-term thing. Marketing isn't, for a lot of the market, it's not instant. It's not short-term. It's a long-term play. And you have the demand capture stuff, but the creation stuff needs to have that long-term lens.
Yeah, I think this is particularly even more relevant now because there's so many businesses, particularly B2B SaaS businesses, that are popping up with, you know, the AI advancements and the way that the technology world is changing. There are a lot of businesses that are popping up that nobody is looking for that solution.
Yeah.
Because they've created a business that no one's ever created before. It does a thing, it does a solution that no other kind of competitor does. So therefore, nobody is searching for your solution. It may be the best solution ever, but if you only create content to say, oh yeah, buy it, you know, we're a great solution, you're really going to struggle.
Yeah.
So you need to educate the market. But let's get into that a little bit. So what kind of content do you need to create? Where do you need to focus if you are going to go on this demand creation side of things?
Yeah. So I think when I think about demand creation, I think probably the most helpful way I think about what you actually need to do in terms of the content you need to create is there's two kind of streams to like what makes up creating demand, like in the way that people talk about demand creation and kind of the overall concept behind it. So the way that I like to think about it is you need to have sort of two streams to your demand creation activities, strategies, things you have set up to reach that 95%. So on one side, you need to have kind of the more brand marketing focused activities. So this is stuff that's going to keep you front of mind with the buyer. And ultimately it's more top of funnel kind of activity to kind of make people more aware of you, to stay front of mind, to build affinity with that buyer, and ultimately to shape sort of positive perceptions about you, your expertise in the space they are in, the category, etc. So I think for like 95% of like B2B SaaS businesses, like we're not, when I talk about brand marketing, like we're not like a big B2C business, like I don't know, like a Coke or something, where you're going to be running like TV spot kind of ads or like Super Bowl ads, and you're going to be kind of like just like clever kind of really creative ad campaigns. That's not, but a majority of B2B SaaS businesses possible. So I think when I talk about brand marketing for most B2B SaaS businesses, particularly kind of earlier stage and even like a scale up, and we're talking about content. Like that's how you build your brand. Like in 95% of cases across B2B at the moment, that's kind of how we start to build a brand with buyers. So from my experience, the best way to do that is you need to, one, understand, like related to the product that you're selling, what are the problems that your buyers need to solve? What are the buyers they're trying to solve? And basically you need to create content to help those people solve those problems on their own without pushing your product, without pushing kind of what you're selling, and basically create really valuable, helpful content and educate them about those problems, educate them, and basically build trust and authority around that topic. And I think if you do that over time, you'll do two things. You'll stay front of mind with the buyer. As we mentioned, you'll build affinity with that buyer because you're helping them solve their problems on their own. And also, particularly if you are educating a buyer around a problem that's related back to your product, you're going to basically make it much easier for when someone goes in market to be able to recall you for that specific problem they're trying to solve.
So let me give you an example. Let me pick a B2B SaaS industry. Let's go with cybersecurity. So let's say you are a cybersecurity B2B SaaS. You do firewalls and virus protection and phishing prevention and all that stuff. So let's say you have that business, a very competitive space.
Yeah.
There's lots of those companies just creating ads and content saying, oh, we've got the best firewall, we've got the best anti-phishing testing system, very, bottom of the funnel marketing.
Yeah.
But if you were to advise one of those businesses to go into more demand generation, demand creation, how should they be creating content? What should they be doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's around I think it doesn't really need to be much more complicated, particularly if you're kind of just getting started with this stuff. It doesn't need to be much more complicated. You're talking about phishing as an issue, and that's the problem that they're solving, their product solving. So the content, for me, I'm looking at more top of funnel content to kind of help create demand by staying in front of mind with a buyer. And I'd be looking at, okay, right, what content can we create to answer all the questions? So that typical buyer has probably got lots of problems when it comes to phishing. What content can we create? And what questions are they asking about? I'm not sure how to do this. I'm not sure how to approach this problem. Create content around those questions, answer those questions without pushing what you're selling, and create lots of different types of content to meet those questions, and just be a helpful source of information. And then you're going to kind of earn the right to build mindshare with that buyer, basically, and stay front of mind with them because you're offering something helpful. They're going to be probably not, and like we mentioned, they're not in a space to buy what you're selling right now, but they're always in a space to get better at their job. They're always in a space to learn more about how they can solve their own problems. And so that's what you're trying to do with the content. And if you do that consistently over time, you stay front of mind. That's just the key, because I think ultimately they have that cybersecurity, let's say a CISO or whoever you're selling to, that person is probably bombarded with emails, ads, lots of different vendors every day are trying to win their attention. So if you can stand out by giving them more helpful content than others and really speak to their specific problems, then I think you've got a much better chance of staying front of mind with the buyer. And that's the key, because ultimately, when they go and market, they need to remember you.
Yeah, there's obviously lots of nuances as to different size of businesses and budgets, but a lot of businesses or a lot of people would rather try and solve a problem on their own first before they hire a company and pay money to do it, or they would certainly like to at least learn about the problem before they make the move to actually paying someone to do it, because it's a problem that you don't understand or it's a technology you don't get. You want to try and figure it out first. So in this example of a cybersecurity company that helps with phishing and ransomware and viruses, so you're saying you should create content like blogs, podcasts, interviews with the founder, LinkedIn content, maybe a YouTube channel, YouTube series, email newsletter, where you're not just selling yourself. There's obviously calls to action in most of the content you create, but it's teaching people, what is phishing? What are the latest trends in phishing that you need to be aware of? What are the dangers and how could this seriously impact your business? Here's 10 steps on how you can improve that issue from happening in your business.
Insights from real practitioners in the space, really in-depth guides that kind of go into specifics and really guide them through step by step how they can kind of accomplish tasks. Loads of different stuff. But I think, ultimately, like you mentioned, you're trying to meet those buyers where they're spending time, and how they like to consume information. That's about knowing your buyer, and then build all that content you were just mentioning, get it to them.
And I think a key thing, we talked about this on episode 42, is first of all, before you go into any sort of marketing campaign, is you need to understand your ICP. So I've seen a lot of people get demand generation wrong because the content isn't quite right for the person that they're targeting. So for example, to go back to this cybersecurity example, if you are targeting very small businesses that are not doing any kind of cybersecurity, and maybe they're a business between 1 and 20 people headcount, and they've not really taken their security seriously yet, they don't have a CTO, for example, then that kind of content needs to be, what is phishing? What is ransomware? What is a virus? Maybe even that basic, because that's the right stuff for them. But then you've got other cybersecurity businesses who are not targeting those sorts of companies. They're targeting very experienced CTOs of like 100+ headcount companies. They know what phishing is. They know what ransomware is. They know what a virus is. So don't teach them that. That you need to get much more granular and detailed, talking about like the latest things they may not yet be aware of, AI and automations and the new threats. There's always like exciting news stories about some big brand that's had a big attack. You should bring in that front of mind, and that just positions you as a more like modern expert. So yeah, first of all, you need to figure out what do your audience actually care about.
Yeah.
It's something that I've battled with here at Rocket SaaS, is like, because we're targeting founders of SaaS businesses who are not marketers. So we create relatively kind of basic marketing concepts and strategies, but then we're also targeting marketing managers who are obviously more experienced. So we go a little bit more in depth when we're trying to target those people. We're not teaching them, what is a funnel. We're teaching them, more advanced demand generation strategies like this. So we've got kind of like 2 content streams to target both of those audiences, but that's key. You've got to figure that out first, because we don't want you to go and create a ton of content and it's just not resonating to the right people. So you've got to figure that out first. In the previous episode, like episode 42, we talked about surveying your audience using something like Winter or Polefish and interviewing your existing customers. What were their challenges? Why did they choose to work with you? So you got to figure all of that out first.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the concept of creating this educational content is definitely where you should start with. Well, not start, but that's the whole concept really of demand creation, I think.
Yeah. And actually something that as we kind of like started talking about the brand marketing side of things, just going to come back to it, that there was another side to it, demand creation as well, that I think is really important, and I think people shouldn't overlook as well, is that you have all that side, you have brand marketing and your content and top of funnel work that you're doing to stay front of mind. Alongside that, what I'd highly recommend in terms of creating demand as well is ultimately the goal is that when someone goes in market, like we're saying, when someone goes in market, they're going to remember you and that you're going to be first on the consideration list, which means they come to you first when they're ready to buy. So alongside all that work you're doing, I'd also say it's really important that we also educate people about our product. So I think this is like we mentioned, this isn't necessarily just about like trying to like push people into a meeting or like push people to buy what you're selling, but you do need to educate people with product marketing about what your product does, the value it provides, why you would choose it versus competitors, how it fits into our overall day-to-day, what the product looks like, how it works in practice. Like all of that stuff is super, super important as well, because they work together. Where like you have the brand marketing stuff, there's earning you the right to stay in front of mind with that buyer, to build mind share, and to like be present when they're ready to go in market. What the product marketing does on the second side of that as well is that they're going to understand intimately what value you provide, why it's the right fit for them, why it's the right fit versus alternatives. And those 2 things are going to work together. So like we mentioned, when someone goes in market and they move themselves in market and they're ready to buy, you're giving yourself the best possible position for them to come to you, because ultimately you're front of mind and they also intimately understand your product, which means ultimately you put yourself in the best possible position to have a good sales conversation, have a good sales process, and be first, which is like super, super important. So yeah.
So I talk a lot on this podcast about know you, like you, trust you. I forget the guy that came up with that. Apologies. People aren't going to buy from you unless they know you, obviously. They need to like you, and ultimately they need to trust you. And that's very hard to do if they've just heard of you for the first time today and they've made an inquiry to have a chat with a salesperson. It's highly unlikely that they are going to buy from you. They're going to have a chat to you and they're going to sit on it for a while. They're going to think about it, and it's pretty likely they're not going to come back. Whereas alternately, if the time that they book a sales call with you or book a demo and they've consumed your content for the last months or years, and they already know you, like you, trust you, that sales call, that demo is going to go a lot smoother, and the likelihood of you closing that deal goes through the roof. So, and you can do that with content. So I see that firsthand since Rocket SaaS moved to a demand generation model. I have multiple people that come onto the sales call. I've never met them before. I've never even heard of them. And they jump on the call and they give me a big smile and they go, Ryan, like as if they know me. I've had people say things like, "Oh, you're like a celebrity to me." I'm like, "Am I? Why?" Because I've seen you. I've listened to your podcast, I've listened to all your podcast episodes. I've listened to some of your YouTube things. I read your blog regularly. I love your newsletter. I really like your website. I love the stuff you put out on LinkedIn. And I'm just lapping it up, going, "Hey, I don't know who you are." And they love it. And then I do the sales pitch, and they're just like, "Yeah, we're ready." And also because we show our pricing on our website, so they even know how much we charge. So I've literally like ticked all of the sales boxes on autopilot because they're consuming our content. So even before they jump on the sales calls, they feel like they know me, they like me, and they trust me because all of the content we create is just making them feel those feelings. And that's ultimately what you want to do. And the other amazing thing, I have already said this on the pod before multiple times, I think, is that when people jump on a sales call with us, we're often not in competition with any other agency. A lot of my previous sales calls I used to do like 2 years ago before we moved to demand generation, they jump on the call and they'd be quite cold and be like, "Look, I'll be honest with you, I'm speaking to 4 other agencies, we're going to go with the best one." And we wouldn't close that many. Now I do a lot of sales calls and they're like, "We're only speaking to you. We're not speaking to any other agencies because we followed you for so long. We like you. We're in a position to go." Brilliant. So our close rate just went through the roof when that like started to happen, and that is all thanks to demand generation and all of the content that we create. So yeah, I'm a massive believer in it. And the other thing that's similar to know you, like you, trust you is a rule that Google came up with. I think Google came up with this rule like ages ago, way before I'd ever heard of demand generation. And that was the 7-11-4 rule, that a buyer needs to consume 7 hours of your content over 11 different touch points in 4 different locations. That, I don't know how they came up with that, but that's what they say is that's what they say is the average that somebody needs to consume and see and come across your content before they are ready to buy from you. So 7 hours of content, that seems like a lot.
Exactly.
But if someone listens to this podcast is probably going to be, I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour long. So that's tick 1 hour. If someone reads like 3 of our blog articles, that's probably another sort of 20 minutes there. Someone browses the website for 15 minutes. Maybe someone has a chat with one of our sales team. Maybe someone reads the email newsletter every week for 10 weeks. It does add up. And it doesn't take that long to get to 7 hours. And then 11 different like touch points is various different like channels. So rather than just going all in on, say, LinkedIn content for your brand, you need to be in multiple places. So Rocket SaaS, for example, we got this podcast on YouTube, on the audio platforms like Spotify. We got a blog, newsletter, ebooks, guides, webinars, recordings of webinars, my personal brand LinkedIn content, organic content from the company. I'm sure I probably missed a few, but I've just counted 10.
That's quite a lot though.
Yeah. Meta ads is another one. So even like Google ads, you probably kind of count that. So I'm up to like 12. So we're just kind of like everywhere. And so again, that's what I hear a lot in sales conversations. I'm like, okay, why have you chosen to book a call with us today? Oh, I just see you guys everywhere. And it just kind of makes them smile. And it makes them go, I need that for my brand. I want to be everywhere. I can see how it works. And then the other was a 7-11-4, and then 4 is like 4 different locations. So a location could be like receiving it via email, or receiving it via a telephone call, or receiving it by looking at a web page. So that's what Google have come up with, and it's very similar to Know You, Like You, Trust You. So I really like that kind of concept and that philosophy. And a lot of what we're talking about today is like an understanding of a philosophy. And once that penny drops, then creating the content just makes a lot more sense, makes it kind of more kind of validating for you to be able to do it. But let's get into that. Like,
yeah,
what we're advising people to do here is obviously to create a lot of content, which is overwhelming perhaps for some people. A lot of people don't have the resources to do it, or they may think they don't have the resources to do it. You've obviously got AI to support in doing that, which is just getting better and better all the time. You've obviously got agencies like Rocket SaaS that can do it for you. But let's talk about like, how would you, rather than just hiring Rocket SaaS, which is the call to action,
it's just a natural
the old easy thing to do. But if you didn't have the budget to work with Rocket SaaS yet, and you had to do it on your own, or if you had an in-house marketing team, you wanted to do it on your own, how do we go about creating a ton of content?
Yeah. So I suppose if we're just starting from like, in terms of like going back to how do we create demand and how do we create the content to do that? I think there's two pieces to it. So on one side, you need to have something interesting to say and create content that's going to make an impact. That's one side of it. And then two, you need to be able to select the channels where you can reach your buyers, and actually build processes that are going to allow you to create enough content regularly to be able to complete sort of the goals that you were talking about, where you're going to be reaching them enough times over a sustained period of time to ultimately like stay front of mind enough that you're going to influence that buyer. So I think on one side, like in terms of like how do you have something interesting to say and put out there, like I think in terms of, particularly from my experience and like obviously Rocket SaaS as well, like I think a lot of the success comes down to you need to have some sort of subject matter expert in the business, some sort of expertise in the business, or get it from outside the business and use that expertise to fuel your content. So that can look like, for example, like at Rocket SaaS, a good example from you, like you're a subject matter expert in the business. So you are taking your learnings from working with all different clients, B2B SaaS clients, all of the sort of marketing lessons that you've learned over the years working in SaaS, taking that, putting it into our content. And that's what gives it weight. And that's what makes people care, because ultimately you have real world experiences and learnings and things that can apply to other people in similar roles and similar positions to help them solve their problems. So I think that's one side of it.
Yeah, so let's sort of pause there, because that is a key point about this whole thing is there's multiple kind of issues with that you need to kind of overcome. Like one is you need to convince your subject matter expert to get on board with this. And I know this is a common problem in any businesses, because the subject matter expert is usually a very busy person, because it's often the founder of the business, the CEO of the business. And you say to them, I need you to create a ton of content. I need you to start a webinar series, a podcast series, YouTube series. I need to write a weekly blog and a weekly newsletter. You know, a lot of them are just going to kind of laugh you out of the room kind of thing. And also they're going to kind of push back on demand generation, and they're going to say, you know, why are we creating sales content? I need leads today kind of thing. So you've got a challenge of one, convincing the thought leaders in the business that this is the right thing to do for the business. I'd recommend sending them this podcast is probably a good place to start, and hopefully that will convince them. So you need to get them on board, basically. So you need to have some meetings with them, and it might be hard. Some people will be harder than others to convince, but that's the first thing you need. And then you need to be able to extract that thought leadership knowledge from them without without saying no, basically, or without them. A lot of people say they'll do it for the first week and then they'll just sack it off quite quickly after that. So you need to get into a rhythm, and you need to get into a process of extracting that content. And like I said, some people will be better than others. Some people will be happy to do video. Some people are very charismatic. Some people may have done a lot of video podcasting work in the past, but a lot of founders of businesses, particularly SaaS businesses, are not those kind of characters. So, I mean, have you got any advice around like how to get content that is thought leadership expertise without asking the founder of the business to be spending 20 hours a week on it?
Yeah. So I think actually just going back to your point about first getting them on board, I would recommend, particularly like if you've got someone who you're concerned you're going to kind of just get a lot of pushback, like perhaps before you sort of like book a meeting with them and say, I want you to make some content with me, start educating them before that meeting about, like, particularly if you have competitors in the space who are doing this and seeing results from it, that can be super helpful. Like, surface that with them, like, these guys are doing this, they're getting really good results from it, I think it's really interesting, tell me what you think, stuff like that. Or just in general, like related spaces, or just in general companies who are succeeding with it, get like, this is working, like get that in front of them. I think that can be really helpful. And then in terms of actually making the content with them, so you got them on board, like they're all bought in, right? But you want to make content with them without completely draining their time. I think ultimately you're going to you need to take the pressure off of the subject matter expert, especially if you haven't got results from the initiative to sort of prove out yet. Because I think that's a really common trend that I've seen, is that once you get the results and like you start to build some momentum, they're all over it. They love it. I want to do more of this. Like, this is working. This is great. But to try and get them, first of all, like, I think start smaller, like with your initiatives at first. And maybe that looks like you're like, right, we'll do like a 30-minute interview with you once a week, probably on a Friday. So it's not earlier in the week when they're really, really busy. And try and just sort of like use that interview as like your kind of starting kind of like piece of like, this is where we're going to get the insights from our expert each week, or even if that's bi-weekly, however often you do it, and just make it a really low commitment thing to start with, and just start to sort of get them into the process, start turning their insights into things, wherever you're going to put that, depending on who your buyer is and what channels you're kind of using. Start using those insights to fuel either your email marketing or on their own personal brand on LinkedIn, wherever that's going to be. And basically, I think once you've done that, and then you can start to demonstrate, because you're starting to put stuff out there, you're starting to get some feedback, you're starting to get people commenting, like giving good feedback to the person in question, and starting to get results. That's when it will get easier, and that's when you can start scaling it. And it's going to be a much easier conversation to scale it and maybe make it a bigger commitment, slightly bigger, build it up over time. And then if you just go, listen, I need 5 hours a week from you. We're going to do 5 interviews and we're going to get loads of content. It's going to be great.
Yeah. No, I think one of the first things to establish early on is if you are extracting this thought leadership from someone else, a founder of the business, is to understand what they're comfortable doing. And what a lot of people make the mistake in doing is trying to shoehorn them into like being a webinar host, or being a podcast host, or doing videos for LinkedIn. And a lot of people like hate that. Like, hopefully you'll get them there, and it's like baby steps to get there. But trying to throw someone on camera or to be a host of a podcast when they're not comfortable doing that is probably a mistake, because they're going to do one, they're going to cringe, they're going to hate it, and then they're going to dislike you. And next thing you know, you're fired. And so do you want to be careful with that? You know,
like I said, it was make some content.
Yeah, hopefully you have got a founder that is bang up for it. If not, you need to be cautious around that. But there is some, so if you do have that example, then you start with basically non-video, non-audio content, which is obviously written content. So what you can do is you just internally, this doesn't go public, you interview the thought leader. So you, as the marketing manager or whatever your role is, you would interview the founder of the business. Yeah, maybe every Friday for just 30 minutes. You have a bunch of interview questions lined up, because that's the content that you want to create, obviously. So let's say, going back to the example of the cybersecurity brand, you want to create a ton of content this month about phishing. What is phishing? What are the dangers? How can you prevent it in your business? So you create a load of interview questions, interview that thought leader, and then obviously record the call. If they're speaking for 30 minutes, you're probably going to get about 4,000 words in the transcript. And those 4,000 words are like gold, because they are thought leadership words. And you can very easily use a tool like ChatGPT to turn those 4,000 words into probably at least 4 blog articles. You could spin out a whole bunch of LinkedIn posts, an email newsletter as well, multiple email newsletters, and bang, you've got all of that really good content, and you can get that out there. Yeah, blog on the website, LinkedIn content, email newsletter. And the great thing about if the subject matter expert's not comfortable in creating some kind of content, they don't have to go public on video. So you can start there with written content, and then as they start to feel comfortable doing these interviews with you, then you can ramp up to say, oh, it'd be great for you to start a podcast. You know, your face doesn't have to be on it. Let's start just an audio version, and then you get into video, and you can kind of ramp up from there. But that's, yeah, my advice is to interview the thought leader expert, and extract content from that. And like you said, start small, maybe just start with LinkedIn posts, and then just try and gradually work it up. Because also it takes time to get the process right.
Yeah.
You know, to interview someone, to get the note taker working, get the right note taker, get the right ChatGPT prompts, get it good.
Ask the right questions.
Ask the right questions, get the process of who's uploading to the website, who's writing these LinkedIn posts, who's scheduling it, what times this is going to go out. How do we turn that into a newsletter? Who's designing the newsletter in HubSpot? Who's scheduling it? It's got a lot of stuff going on. And that the first like 5 that you do is going to be very bitty, very time consuming, going back and forth. But after you get in the rhythm, hire the right people, the right VA, or something like an agency like Rocket SaaS to do that for you, you'll get into rhythm, and it'll just start to pop off really nicely. And it just means it's kind of less work for everyone, but, you know, better results. Yeah. So yeah, that's my kind of overall advice around how to create a lot of content with thought leadership, without it, taking too much time from the thought leader.
Yeah. And I think as well, once you actually, like you said, once you get into a rhythm of it, and you start to get that feedback, like I said, it gets so much easier.
Yeah.
So much easier because people are bought in. As soon as people are bought in, then you start getting more ideas from people outside. You actually get input from the actual expert as well. And naturally, everything starts flowing from when you start making the content, you get feedback from the audience. So ideas get easier, what you're talking about, the concepts, topics, all that stuff. And that's when it starts really sort of kicking in and building momentum.
Yeah. So to give an example, so me and Jamie are sat here right now in the studio. I mean, this studio has cost a few quid, but we could have done this on the cheap, on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
But what's happening with this podcast is it's going to be, I think, about maybe 45 minutes, an hour long. So we're going to put this podcast out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're going to edit the whole thing to be a long form YouTube video. We're going to extract at least probably 10 short clips of 30 to 90 second clips. They're going to be posted all across LinkedIn, on my personal brand, Jamie's personal brand, the company's personal brand. We're going to upload the whole recording into Otter to give us the transcript, which is probably going to be about, 10,000 words maybe. Yeah. We're going to use ChatGPT to turn those 10,000 words into multiple different blog articles. We're going to turn it into a couple of different email newsletters that go out to our community. What else is there? We might even turn the whole thing into an ebook to get it designed really nicely, upload it to the website. I'm sure there's some other things that I've missed as well, but you can see I've just kind of reeled off so much content that can be created just from me and Jamie sat here having a chat.
Yeah.
And it's very natural for us because we're both subject matter experts. We've got into a nice rhythm now. All that stuff I've listed just now, that's not even our job. We've hired the right people to make that happen now. We've got the right process in place. So we're going to go and grab some lunch after this, and that machine will just get churning, and suddenly we create a ton of content. And we've not even talked about ads yet. All of that content I've mentioned, we're going to boost it with ads. We're going to pump LinkedIn ads into it, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, so that content just gets seen everywhere. And that's all that done. And then guess what's going to happen next week? Same again. Bosh, more content. So when I describe it like that, it sounds quite easy. Yeah. It's been hard to get it off the ground. But now this podcast, for example, is on episode, I think, 47. Yeah. So it's been running for almost a year now. But we've created this process that is really, really powerful. And people are just consuming our content, knowing us, liking us, trusting us.
Yeah.
And it's just rapidly.
And just to hop in as well, I think it's quite a nice sort of segue into the next. So obviously we're just talking about how do you actually build that sort of demand creation engine. Obviously we've just talked about, okay, get your sort of subject matter expertise, get your sort of get that on board, start getting the insights you need to build the content, build the processes to get that content out there and get it enough, get enough content in enough places to make an impact. I think a good principle to talk about here as well that's important for people to know. A lot of people might have already kind of be aware of this, but people aren't. A big principle, particularly for people who believe in this kind of approach of demand generation, demand creation, is with your content, a traditional approach to B2B content is to put a form in front of it, gate it, and basically ask for people's contact details in order to see your content. I actually would say I'm not religious on this. There are circumstances where gating content can make sense. There are circumstances where you can put a gate in front of it, and in certain contexts, it makes sense for you to do that as a business. But I think an overarching principle of how you create demand is that you give the content to the buyer, ungated, friction-free, and you basically are aiming for that content to be consumed. The goal isn't getting contact details on a form so you can then email them in your CRM and sort of hammer them with messages. The goal is actually you want that content consumed because that's what's going to keep you front of mind, like we said earlier. That's what's going to kind of build affinity and make you trusted, make you an expert. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of bring in here is that ultimately we're getting that expertise from our subject matter expert. We're building loads of content around it. We're distributing that. We don't want to put a gate in front of 90% of it because we want it to be seen. We want that content to be consumed. That's stuff that changes perceptions. It changes the way people think about you and the market. It changes behavior. And that's what marketing is really about, I think, is about changing the things that we can impact the most are behaviors, and we can impact the way people think. I think it's actually very difficult sometimes for us to we can't like we said earlier, we can't force people to buy, but we can impact those things. And I think ungating content is like a natural way for us to do that, because that's what we want. We want people to consume the content, change the way they think, change the way they behave.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's not something we talked about. Yeah, ungating content is a key thing of demand generation. Yeah, you can't force people to buy. That's a kind of lead gen model. As you want to learn about how to, what is phishing and how to solve phishing. You should enter your email address to download our guide, and then we're going to hammer you with emails and cold calls until you buy.
You're going to get the best nurture sequence you've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of marketers are aware that that doesn't really work anymore. That may have worked like sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and a lot of people are moving away from that now. And yeah, again, it's like a philosophy thing. You're not going to force people to buy by forcing their email address. You're much better off letting people consume that content on their own, positioning you as an expert, and they will come to you when they're ready. I mean, let's talk about, I think in the cafe earlier, before we started this podcast, we talked about your experience at Cognism and how they really embrace the demand generation model, and one of the biggest factors as to how they scaled so rapidly. But then, and we talked about ungating things, not trying to force people to buy. But then equally, Cognism did have a big cold calling department. They were hammering the phones and calling people that potentially had never heard of Cognism before. So, I mean, in your experience with Cognism, does that sort of thing work hand in hand with this demand generation strategy, and also trying to kind of force people with the sales angle at the same time? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience working for Cognism, and also from what I understand about what Cognism looked like before I joined, there's definitely like something to be said about like, you would naturally lean to, especially a few years back, you naturally lean to like marketing would, like we said, would serve content, generate leads, like where you kind of get the contact details of relevant people, like serving ebooks and stuff like white papers, and you get kind of thousands of, I mean, Cognism, from what I understand as well at that point, were generating thousands of like leads a month from like ebooks and white papers and gated content. And then they would give that to the sales team, and the sales team would phone them and email them and hammer them. And ultimately what actually happened, I think it was about 1% of those leads closed. They were generating thousands of leads, so they would actually close deals from it, but it wasn't scalable, and it became like, and the sales team would resent the leads they were being given because there's no buying intent behind those people. Like I was saying earlier, 95% of people aren't ready to buy right now. So if they're just downloading an ebook, they just want the ebook. They don't necessarily want your product. So I think like looking back then, people might say that's a natural role for marketing, is we're just feeding the sales team information and leads to buy, to sell, follow up with, sorry. But what actually happened is when I joined Cognism when they were about, I think like a year or so into like their demand generation kind of journey. They'd switched their whole strategy from this lead gen model, where they were kind of just focused on generating leads, contact details for the sales team, to actually doing what we're talking about right now, creating demand with like good content, ungated, friction-free, to stay front of mind with buyers, product marketing, to educate people about their product and help them understand that, and also had their demand capture program set up to catch people who was in market. So I joined them like a year after they kind of got onto that journey. And what I saw in terms of how the demand generation approach worked with the sales team was actually super interesting, because we had a massive sales team at Cognism, right? And what the feedback that I understood was that because we as a marketing team were distributing tons of content and answering questions that buyers had about their own problems, helping them solve them problems, being really trusted and given expertise in the space and being a thought leader, what actually ended up happening was that the sales team were coming back to us and saying, I'm having amazing conversations, because people were just saying, oh yeah, I know Cognism, I know you. You do amazing content around cold calling, for example. And like the sales team were thrilled. And then we'd be getting, because ultimately what we were trying to achieve as well, we're trying to optimize towards people coming inbound to us rather than us having to go outbound to them. So we're getting tons of like inbound demo requests, people raising their hand saying, I'm ready to buy, I want to talk to you about your product. And the sales team was like, these leads are fantastic because people are coming, they know who we are, they understand what our product does, they have a really favorable opinion of who Cognism are because we've built that trust over time. And ultimately what I saw was actually, rather than the kind of route of like, let's just feed the sales team loads of leads and they end up resenting you because you're just giving them crap leads. Actually, what they found was when they're cold calling, their job's easier because they know Cognism is, and they've heard of us. We've been giving them amazing content over time. They even understand the product really deeply. It's a much easier conversation for an SDR to have.
Know you, like you, trust you.
Know you, like you, trust you.
So give me specific examples of what content were Cognism creating.
So I think something that Cognism done really well when I was there is they were very specific about being known for one thing and really owning a topic in the minds of the buyers they were trying to reach. So just to give an example, like we were targeting the sales persona. So these are people like SDRs, sales leaders, etc. And they really doubled down on creating content to be known for cold calling, to like be the experts in helping those buyers solve their problems around cold calling, improve their cold calling performance, and just generally get better at their sort of cold calling parts of their job. So they created tons of content, and they, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of expertise, like they really leverage, for example, the cold calling leaders in their own business, really using those people as like the face of that content. So at the time, it was people like Dave Bentham, and also Rachel Goldston, others as well. But they basically use those people to gain insights from them and to fuel the content in the way that we were talking about earlier. And then eventually, once we'd kind of like scaled that content a bit and like it was performing well, they reached out to external people, external like influencers in the cold calling space. So people like Ryan Reisert, Morgan Ingram, and they actually set up like agreements with those people to basically form like influencer partnerships. And that wasn't about, again, like in like the D2C space, that's typically like you're pushing the product. It wasn't like that at all. In the B2B space, the way Cognism used their influencers and people like Ryan Reisert, Morgan Ingram, is to create demand. And basically that meant like using them to fuel the content, using their insights about cold calling, about sales, to fuel their webinars, to fuel their blogs, to fuel their guides, and getting their insights, getting that into the content, and then also having those influencers distribute the content on their own channels so we could get in front of their audience, who are all obviously sales professionals, cold callers themselves. So that was something they did really well. They really used SMEs really, really well to fuel that cold calling topic. So they basically started to own that topic, especially with the audiences they were reaching with their influencers and their own network. And then they created really comprehensive content to kind of own the topic as well, which a big one that I kind of look back on now is they created something called the State of Cold Calling Report, which was a massive piece of work that they did with, I think there's a group called We Have a Meeting, where they broke down, I think it was thousands of cold calls over a year. And basically what they did was they basically built a whole ebook, white paper, whatever you want to call it. It was ungated, it was on the website. But basically they broke down all of these calls from over a year into a piece of original research to basically give sales professionals an insight into, like, for example, they were answering questions like, how long does an average cold call last? What was the most successful cold call opener, I think? And there was lots of different insights that they broke down from all of these cold calls over a year. And basically, I think that was a super, super influential kind of report for the industry because it was original research. So it's not something that's easily copied. And it's something where they're leading the conversation. And I think that's really key to sort of like with the things we've been talking about in terms of creating demand and sort of like staying front of mind of a buyer. If your content if you can create content that's original and has a original point of view, which is why SMEs are so important, then you earn the right to stay front of mind with that buyer and win their attention, which is like a massive, massive part of it.
Yeah, got it. So Cognism, obviously they're not a cold calling company. They don't do cold calls for you. They're like a call center. Cognism, for those of you that don't know, they sell data. They sell phone numbers and email addresses and have a database where you can find your potential leads in there. That's what they do. So rather than creating content specifically about their product, which they did as well, but they leaned heavily into trying to understand what their target audience really cared about, which is perhaps on the surface, it's not about the leads. It's not about like who's the right person to call, because I can get that data from various different places like cheap alternatives. It's our audience really care about how to be better at doing cold calls.
Yeah.
Even though that's not what we do directly as a service, if we can teach our market on how to do better openers, how long should a call last, just how to improve performance. So that means that anybody in our space, when they're Googling those sorts of questions, asking ChatGPT, or just seeing something pop up on their LinkedIn, they're going to go, that's the content that I care about. I'm going to consume that content. And they just start to follow that brand.
Yeah.
Know them, like them, trust them. And then it's, oh, and by the way, we also do the service, which is extremely closely related to the stuff that you're learning about.
Yeah.
And that's how they buy.
Ultimately, like, it ties back into the product really nicely, which is a really important place to start. I think if you're trying to select what topic you're going after, I'd always start with something that ties back into your product or service naturally. For Cognism, it worked really well because ultimately, if someone's really interested in improving their cold calling performance, at some point, there's a good chance that they might want to improve the data to basically have better results from cold calling. And if you're educating them about that over time, like Cognism were, naturally, when they went in market, they're like, well, Cognism have been talking about cold calling for a long time. I know they're a data vendor because they've been educating me about their product as well. So it's like a natural position where, like, we're in market now, let's go talk to Cognism.
Yeah. So you've got to go downstream sometimes a little bit, downstream to what you actually do, or maybe even upstream a little bit. But you've got to be careful with that. You don't want to start creating content that is just not related to what you do. Like, I think my business made that mistake. We started to create content around how SaaS companies can raise funding. How can you be like Series A funding ready? Because all of our clients are trying to do that. But then I realized that that's just too far removed from what we actually do as a marketing agency. So we had to kind of rein that in. So you got to figure that out. Again, we probably didn't do the right market research. We just kind of went ahead and did it. So those sorts of lessons to learn. But definitely, if you are struggling to create content because your specific thing is very technical, then perhaps think about going like upstream, downstream. And just the key is finding out what do your audience actually care about. And often, I'm sorry to say, it's not your products. It's not. It's something above it or below it kind of thing. So that's possibly where you need to start with content creation. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, Jamie. I think we've covered that really well. I think to summarize, demand creation is targeting the 95% of people that are not in market, they're not Googling, they're not ready to buy. So you need to create content that they're going to enjoy consuming. And so when they are ready to buy, because they've got money later down the line, or it's become more of a burning problem, they've consumed your content for so long, they know you, like you, trust you, that they know exactly who to go to. And you have to create a lot of content. You have to extract that from the thought leader in the business, not just from yourself if you're the marketer, or using AI to create rubbish content. You need the thought leaders to be involved in that, and repurposing content. So trying to get in as many places as possible within resource, and just get the content out there, boost it out there with ads, which is not much. We haven't really covered ads much today. We'll probably do that on the next podcast.
That's good, actually.
And that is essentially how you win with demand capture. And if you haven't listened to it already, go back to episode 42 where we talk about demand capture. Whereas when you've moved those 95% of people that they are ready to buy, how do you make them buy? So that's a really good episode too. This is kind of like a 2-part episode. But Jamie, thank you so much. I think next time we probably will talk about LinkedIn retargeting ads. How about that?
Yeah, I think, in terms of distribution with advertising, I think it could be a really interesting one. So let's get it done.
Let's get into that. Thank you so much. And have a great week.
Cool.